This video will demonstrate how to clean the interior of your air turbine, including the slip rings. First, you're going to have to disconnect the wires and remove the turbine from the mount, as per the air owner's manual. Next, remove the nose cone. Get your fingers underneath and pull straight out to unclip it from the hub. Next, you'll use a 5/16 inch hex key to remove the blade hub assembly. You may need another tool like a screwdriver in order to gain leverage, because the rotor is attached very securely to the hub. Now, it's important to realize that you have to turn the hex key this way to the right, because you're loosening the rotor rather than the rotor nut. So you can insert a tool like this to gain leverage, and you may even need a rubber mallet to get the hex key to loosen the rotor. Next, you're going to use a 5/32 inch hex key to remove the 3 screws from the face of the turbine. Now use a flathead screwdriver to carefully pry open the face, and be careful not to damage the O-ring, or if you have a marine unit, to not damage the paint. Go ahead and attach the anti-static wrist strap as per the instructions in the package, so that you can ground yourself to the body of the turbine. Now you can lift up and pull the face casting from the body of the turbine. Note the routing of the wires connecting the stator windings to the circuit board. Look at the way the circuit is positioned in the body and how the brushes make contact with the slip rings. Study the exploded view in the manual for part identification. Using a 7/64 inch Allen key, remove the 3 small screws connecting the stator wires to the circuit. Note that it is very easy to strip the threads on these screws, or even crack the circuit board when you reattach these screws. So it's important that these screws be later reattached in the same manner and torqued to 10 inch-pounds as specified in the circuit replacement instructions. Here I'm going to demonstrate how to remove the rotor for cleaning. This requires a moderate amount of force. So grasp the face casting with both hands, use the palm of one hand to push the rotor shaft straight in, and then use your thumb to push it all the way through and pull the rotor out. Now try spinning the face bearings with your finger and make sure that you don't feel any significant play and that they feel smooth. Use a pair of external snap ring pliers to remove the snap ring from the groove that's right below the slip rings on the yaw shaft assembly. You may need another tool like a screwdriver to assist in removing the snap ring. Once the snap ring is removed, use a hammer and a blunt object or a plastic mallet to drive the yaw shaft assembly out by hitting on the top of the slip ring assembly. You may need to use a moderate amount of force, but be careful. If it requires more than a moderate amount of force, or if you have concern about the well-being of the balance of components due to the force necessary to remove the yaw shaft, do not attempt to force the yaw shaft out of the body. Contact Primus Windpower for advice on how to proceed. Now let's start cleaning. Use a paper towel to wipe the metal debris off the magnets on the rotor. Now grab a fresh paper towel and clean the extra carbon debris off the snap ring and slip rings, as you can see here. Go one step further by grabbing a Brillo pad or emery cloth and wiping the more ingrained carbon debris from the slip rings. Keep in mind that the slip rings don't have to look brand new. Just go until you're not getting any more carbon debris off. It's normal to have tracks from the brushes left on the slip rings after you're done cleaning. Grab a fresh paper towel and clean the rest of the interior of your air turbine. Okay, cleaning's done. Now it's time to reinstall the yaw assembly. First, make sure that your brushes are in place, and then guide the yaw shaft assembly through the bearing hole and the snap ring, and carefully guide the slip rings over each brush one at a time. You may find that the brush pops out of place. Carefully push it back in and guide the slip rings over it one brush at a time. Use caution with the brushes because they're brittle and you could break the wires if you bend them back and forth too much. At the end, you may need a rubber mallet to get the yaw assembly all the way through and the groove exposed for the snap ring. In the end, Take a close look at each brush and make sure it's properly contacting the appropriate slip ring. Make sure the spring is properly seated and that the brush wires are not being pinched. Go ahead and grab your external snap ring pliers to reinstall the snap ring. Use compressed air to blow out any remaining debris. Orient your turbine so the yaw assembly is facing towards you. Using the 3 small socket head screws, connect the wires from the alternator assembly in the following order from right to left. Number 1 will go on the right terminal, number 3 will go in the middle terminal, and number 2 will go on the left terminal, which is farther apart from the other 2 terminals. Make sure that you divert wires number 1 and 3 around the PIC chip, as shown in the figure here. Make sure not to run the wires over the PIC chip because that can cause malfunction. See this figure taken from the circuit replacement instructions for clarity. Carefully snug each of the 3 stator wire mounting screws, ensuring that the connectors maintain the correct alignment. Do not over-tighten these screws, as the threads are easy to strip and you could even crack the circuit board. Tighten the screws to the point where a light push in either direction on the ring terminal does not rotate the screw or ring terminal. This should be 10 inch-pounds of torque. Push the 3 stator wires into the body so they will not interfere with the circuit, yaw shaft, or rotor. As you assemble the alternator assembly to the body, be sensitive to grabbing. Grabbing can indicate the stator wires are interfering with the circuit. Make sure that the wound stator wires do not contact the body casting. Loosely thread in the face bolts. Place the black O-ring around the perimeter of your air alternator assembly and loosely fit it into the gap between the face and body castings. Do your best not to twist the O-ring as you install it. Use a rubber mallet to ensure that the alternator assembly is fully seated to the body casting before you tighten the screws. Now that you have the alternator assembly in place, tighten the 3 face bolts to 35 inch-pounds of torque. Once you have the 3 face bolts torqued properly, perform the 3 bench tests described in the Air Owner's Manual. Feel free to contact your dealer or Primus Windpower if you have any questions.